All right, so just to start off with is that disruption and crises are not new, right? I think we've got some dates there that are easily in the 21st century, but a crisis has occurred at multiple times, and whether they are geopolitical crises or financial crises or something like the pandemic where there is a lot more happening, but even cyber crisis, and we've seen recently this was the NotPetya cyber ransomware issue that caused a lot of disruption. But we saw just a few weeks ago already, just in Transnet, them having a similar incident and what that meant for the supply chain, how that not only impacted supply chains from a corporate perspective, but really shook the earth in terms of a national capability to manage their supply chain. So it does happen, and the quicker that we are able to respond to this, that's better. So I think my point here is really that it's not new. It's actually, as much as we think it's a crisis and it's an anomalous incident, it really isn't. We expect these black swan events to come up at regular intervals. You may not know the shape, form, or nature of it, but you have to expect that these curveballs are going to get thrown your way. All right, so what we're starting to see is that as we look into organizations, and I spoke about the survey that we ran, that there is a lot of paradoxes that are happening with what leaders are having to deal with. And it really is depending on how far away from the crisis that you are in. So if you are in the crisis itself or slightly after the crisis, and this we saw as part of the pandemic, but also more recently with the riots in KZN and Gauteng, is the survival paradox, right? How do I'm suffering a loss. There are disruptions to my supply, my operations. How am I ensuring survival? Do I want to ramp up, ramp down? How am I going to just meet current demand? And that really focuses on the here and now thinking. And it's a necessary part, right? Because you do need to start to solve the here and now problems. And what I found is that most organizations look internally, and rightfully so, because you're the best people to actually deal with this are actually the people that know your operations the best. And then we move into slightly more near and medium term objectives, and that is around the fulfillment. How am I protecting my market share? I've now had a disruption, it's caused some loss. How do I make up that deficit that I might have created, either from a revenue perspective, or if it's driven up my costs, how do I start to contain that cost? How do I look at my working capital? How do I re-expend my budgets? And sometimes a little more strategically, because of what's changed in the environment with, obviously like the pandemic really fundamentally changing the way in which we work, the way in which customers associate with us. How does my operating model change? And then we get to what we call the resilience paradox, right? Which is really around what I think the bulk of this presentation is going to be, which is, what is my long-term strategy? And I spoke about the fact that this resilience needs to happen at organizational level. It needs to happen at leadership level. And then for us specifically around the table today is, what does that mean from a supply chain resilience perspective? And I spoke about that the proximity away from your actual incident or disruption will actually drive what you're going to do at various stages. And at Deloitte, we call this almost like a threefold process, which is a respond, recover, thrive, really tied to respond really much in the short term. How am I going to recover, lick my wounds, fix, and then thrive is medium to longer term. How am I actually going to grow and actually build an organization and potentially find opportunity in what was a crisis? Okay, so let me go into, so I also mentioned the survey that we did, and like I said before, it's in excess of 2,000 C-suite executives across 21 countries, a lot in both North America and Europe, but obviously some in more developing countries like South America and in South Africa. And what we found was that there are 5 characteristics that drive these organizations that really set them apart. So, we asked these C-suite individuals, how did they think? And it was a self-assessment. They had done well, and how well they fared against being able to rebound after the pandemic. And what came up was these 5 criteria, which is, about being prepared, right? And it is about saying, how do you take your short-term and your long-term priorities and balance them against each other? How are you balancing? And often we would go into, a cost-cutting exercise, and we saw a lot of our clients do that, cut spend, cut digital spend right at the beginning of the pandemic. But it actually is almost counterintuitive, because you actually want to make sure that you're sustainable into the future. So being able to balance the short-term and long-term opportunities, and what do they mean by being prepared? So that having invested in digital technologies ahead of time, whether it was for their operations or for people to collaborate, that investment really paid off, especially if they were actually at the front of the curve, of the adoption curve. Then we look at adaptable, and this is really not just about the organization being adaptable, not just about your systems being adaptable and flexible, but actually about your people. And do they have the right mindset? Are they in their mind, adjusting to the change, or do you have people, when we moved into full remote work, did people embrace the new way of working, or was it an excuse for them to either do less or produce less quality? Was there, and as we're going to go back into a hybrid way, are your employees adaptable enough to be able to meet these new requirements? Tied to the adaptability, I think, is this element of collaboration, right? Which is now collaboration, not just within the organization, but also with outside of the organizations, both with your suppliers and your customers. And what it showed was that it obviously sped up decision making. So being able to have information at your fingertips. And so collaboration could be very much a relationship thing, where you have good relationships. So, information doesn't have to be available at the drop of the hat or a click of a button. It can be something that you could call up somebody. And I think it was Loshni earlier that talked about how important those longer relationships are in our business. So it definitely speeds up decision making, de-risks your business, but also bringing in different perspectives leads to a lot more innovation. Trust is starting to come up really as a very critical element, and as almost the hard point in which we connect with both our clients and our people, is starting to get eroded the longer that we stay remotely. And the emergence of trust as a really strong driver for resilience is actually very notable. And because apart from improving communication and transparency, I think trust is a pivotal part of any relationship. And trust is really what allows you to work with someone just based on not on a contract, not on something that's obligated and forced, but really understanding that there's a win-win for each one of us. So the emergence of trust as an asset and of an organization, and those relationships that you've cultivated, treating efforts as long-term efforts as opposed to transactional, is a critical part of resilience. The whole agenda around responsibility, and I think you would have seen it as the whole ESG, environmental, social, and governance agenda, is also starting to lift its head. And I think in South Africa, really starting to take off quite nicely. And what I want to highlight here is that it's actually beyond compliance, if you will, and maybe we call it here beyond profit, but it really is beyond just being able to meet the regulations, whether it's from an environmental perspective, whether it is from an ESG perspective or a BBBE perspective. It's really about going above and beyond, but understanding that what you're doing is for the greater good of society as well as your people. Okay, I'm going to try and go very quickly through a few of these findings, and just start to give you a flavor of what's there, and just some highlight points. I'm happy to also share some of these slides with the audience should you require, so you can look at it in a lot more detail. But this particular publication is freely available on our website, and also happy to provide the link should you need it. So, and nothing new here, right? I think really around being prepared is that a lot of the preparedness came from being having invested in new tech, new system, data cleansing. So a lot of that digital transformation agenda that you're looking at, companies that fared well during the pandemic already had a lot of that in place. So they were easy for them to consult, make decisions, and both from a collaborative perspective, but also from an information sharing perspective, that has come out. Diversifying our supply chain. So where where organizations have come up with or previously had diverse supply chains. They found a lot more flexibility in being able to switch different partners, different vendors. So when there was a blockage in the East, being able to pivot to other areas, but also being able to manage redundant stores, understanding alternate sources of supply, very critical. So diversifying revenue streams is a big one. And I think overarchingly, as much as you can have operational resilience, you've got to have revenue resilience. And that is a critical part of how you develop your resilience strategy. We've seen, overnight almost, how buying patterns have shifted, where, while we still have a lot of bricks and mortar, the whole omni-channel experience, customer expectations around the last mile delivery times, your reverse logistics has fundamentally changed in the last year. And being able to use that as an opportunity, understand where your customers are shifting to, and being able to shift your revenue streams and your products and services is also a sign of resilience. I spoke about tech. I'm going to go to the next one. So adaptable organizations, and a lot of these concepts are very interlinked, right? So flexibility and adaptability really comes from being able to put into place the right technology and systems that facilitate that transaction. But I spoke earlier about the fact that it's not just hard and about technology. It really is about, does your heart and mind actually buy into the organization? And that's where we're seeing this emergence of some of these softer factors, if you will, where does your system, or does your employees' value system, does your customers' value system, does your suppliers' value system align with that of the organization? Now, we personally, and I suspect a few of the people in the audience, would have seen a lot of turnover because people are reevaluating the way in which they transact with their employers, right? There's a lot more opportunity out there in the world, remote working becoming a real possibility for you to actually have global experience as opposed to just keeping your options within the South African context. And that reassessment of whether or not value systems align can work for us and against us. And I think companies that have had that solid base where both their customers as well as their people bought into their sense of value and what impact they want to make into the world definitely did thrive. The other softer skills, in order for you to be a lot more resilient, and I think you'll see a concept of agility and resilience start to come up a lot more in this, is some of the softer skills around critical thinking, creativity, empathy, inclusiveness. I was actually surprised to see inclusiveness just because of how important diversity is come up as low as it did, but obviously still one of the top factors. Now, this is where we need to start thinking about, we spoke in our previous segment about training in the supply chain environment and what that meant, and how are we actually going to start giving people more exposure as well as developing some of these softer skills. They're not as easy to develop. There's a lot that you can look at certainly from an innovation and a critical thinking perspective that is hard courseware, but a lot of this is experiential, but also giving people the room and the capability to fail, to try new things, but also to be able to express themselves in a safe environment. So these are some of the considerations we need to start building into how we manage our teams. Collaboration really, and I think it speaks for itself, right? Because the fact that we were not able to meet each other at the workplace, see each other face to face, has really enhanced how we have to be very, very deliberate about how we collaborate with our peers. So the technology that's coming out, and there are all sorts of things like mirror boards that we use quite extensively. I think the technology is there and it's meeting us there. But how do you get people to actually engage in this remote collaboration? And that's some of the things companies are struggling with. So, you don't want to have someone, and I suspect there might be, and I'm equally guilty of it, that you're fending off a WhatsApp message or doing some emails on the side. So how do you get people properly engaged using technology platforms so that it actually can give you the collaboration designed for? I spoke earlier about trust, and we spoke, maybe touch physical trust is, and we spoke about the cyber attacks. Digital trust is really coming to the fore, and this is a hard topic for how do you secure your organization so that your customers actually feel safe transacting with you. But more and more, we're seeing the emergence of this emotional trust. And, right at the beginning of the pandemic, the physical trust was definitely there. Am I able to keep my employees safe? Am I able to keep my customers safe? But that has evolved now to say, do I feel safe with you? We've had, obviously, specific job cuts. We've had Section 189 processes run in a few different companies, and people aren't feeling as safe as they used to. So for you to create a resilient organization, you must be able to trust that your employees are not only there, but there for the long haul, because just the cost of having to retrain and rehire is just too high. So also very critical element of starting to create resiliency. I'm not going to touch too much on supporting employees. I think, a fair amount of organizations have really come to the party, really responded well during the pandemic, and taken care of the employees. Supporting society as well. We'll see that a lot of our CXOs rated themselves as having done well or did okay, but is okay enough when it comes to helping society? Are we still doing it just because we believe we'll get some brownie points out of it, or we understanding that integrating ourselves into society actually is a mutually beneficial exercise? And it's part of a different finding of a different survey altogether. But what we've found is that while more and more organizations are understanding the benefit of embracing a stronger ESG and a societal benefit agenda, what they have not tied it to yet is how that their businesses grow and benefit from that. And that, I think, is a missing link, that understanding the business case for investment in society and the growth of society is there. We just haven't given it deliberate focus. Okay, I'm going to, I perhaps want to stop here before I move on to this, and I really want to focus on the left-hand side of the slide, is that we've talked about the rise of the initiative, the focus in terms of environmental sustainability, health, for obvious reasons. And you'll find that lower down, and this is where I think we need to challenge ourselves as leadership, is that when we start to look at aspects of equality, pay equality, we really are not doing enough. This is a list of areas and issues that we think we should be focusing on in the future, but really I think needs to start getting a huge amount of focus, and a topic that I think we've covered exhaustively during the summit in these last 2 days. Okay, just reiterating, and I'm going to go into now talking about resilient leadership, that three-step process of respond, recover, thrive, and I'm going to talk you through some of the strategies that as you go along with this particular resilience build. So when it comes to building resilient leadership, what the focus area is going to be really on making sure that you build the mental well-being of your employees, and we really are starting to see that. So not only is there an anxiousness and anxiety around your physical security, both from a health perspective as well as a physical perspective, we're starting to see that mental health and people really starting to take strain. And for the immediate future, that's going to be a huge focus area for CEOs to focus on, to make sure that people feel that they are valued, but also that connectivity and that engagement with the organization is kept alive. Okay. So what does it mean from a leadership perspective, right? And it brings into place 4 key areas that leaders need to start understanding and bringing into their strategies. This is the beliefs, right? And this is about value creating discoveries, right? So how are you going to look at what's happened as part of this disruption, apart from fixing with sticky tape, plugging the holes, optimizing? Are you actively looking for the opportunity? Do you believe that from disruption comes opportunity? And does your strategic process allow you to be able to do that? The second is the attitudes, and we've spoken about that previously, is are you actually, and not just you as your employees, but are you as a leadership team equipped with the essential mindset shifts that move you toward these these resiliencies. And this is embracing the future, embracing the uncertainty, being able to work with ambiguity. And it sounds like something that we think everybody should be able to have, but you would have seen it in your own organizations, that resistance to change, that resistance, even now, as and I spoke about how we move into back into a hybrid way of work, people are equally starting to kick their heels in about whether they want to stay remote or not. So are you understanding what it takes to actually move on and pass this pandemic? Move the dial from an agility perspective, and how you potentially need to start building it into your KPIs. Are you building structures then for a resilient organization, right? And this is that takes me to the next step, is what when you start to build structures for a resilient organization, we've got 7 key elements that I'm going to go straight onto this. This is really about how we move your mindset, how the mindset shift needs to change. You need to change your attitude from reacting currently from a pandemic immediacy perspective into pioneering, reinventing yourself along the way, but really starting to think of novel ideas and being actual market forerunners, moving from being inward looking into market making. So stop looking at how you save yourself into success, but how you actually grow yourself through new revenue streams. And then planning, moving from the immediate and into contingency planning into the strategic, and obviously using agile management techniques as part of that. I'm gonna skip a couple of slides and go straight into the 7 elements for resilience, right? And you'll see this mirrors really what you would find in most organizations, and that is starting with resilient strategies, right? So how do we define resiliency before we can start to talk about redundancy and how we duplicate across our supplier base or diversify our supply? Before we even get to that operational and tactical level, are we building resiliency into our strategy? We look at resilient growth. Are you close enough to your customers? Are you able to change and mix and match and create new products quickly enough so that it actually meets the customer's demands as quickly as it is changing? Once you've set your strategy and understood whether you are actually reading the market and responding to it well enough, either through your product innovation or using current revenue streams in a different way, are your operations then following suit? And as you can see, it's a nice, neat little value chain, right? You've got to start with strategy and make sure that that resiliency flows into your operations. And this is where a lot of our clients are currently focusing, is how we build in that resilience, right? But what the danger is that when we are putting in these tools that start to give us more visibility and give us a lot more efficiency in our operations, is that it actually hasn't been tested against whether or not these initiatives are part of your resiliency strategy and where you want to go, or your customer strategy. So doing these in isolation is actually a very dangerous occupation, but potentially an expensive one, because you may have to redo some of the things we've thought about. Technology, I think resilient technology speaks for itself, and they go hand in hand with resilient operations. It's really, there's such a plethora of different technologies out there. How you select this, how you partner as this, so you don't try and do everything yourself. How do you bring in an ecosystem of different partners that can add to this pie? Because with the technology changing as quickly as it does, you want to be able to have the flexibility of being able to move between them as the best of breed shifts. That the days of the monolithic ERP system are gone. So you're looking at a postmodern ERP that allows you a lot more flexibility. So resilient technology really is a fundamental shift from past technology. So the move towards cloud to create that flexibility, agility, scalability is a huge topic, and it's something that we're seeing definitely starting to take a hold in, both from a procurement perspective as well as a digital supply chain perspective. So resilient work is, how do you take your people with you in this journey, right? Understanding what's the new jobs to be done. What are the new skill sets that you need to look at? And we spoke in our previous segment around what that transformation agenda looks like, or a development agenda, what courseware is available out there? What are these smaller service providers looking at? And are we actually equipping our people with the hard skills? So whether it is, understanding what cloud means in your environment, understanding the new way of work, the future of work, remote working, analytics has come up as a huge topic, machine learning, AI, robotic process automation. So how are you able to stay current with not only things that are relevant to your field, but are impacting your field, is going to be a critical element. Tied to the hard skills, though, is also the soft skills and the mindset. So are you able to take your people on that journey with you and give them a vested interest for transforming themselves as much as the organization? So resilient capital, optimizing your working capital, your capital structures, I think for me is finding some innovation in there. It's also, I think, going back to saying, once you've looked at your strategy, you've looked at how you want to manage your operations, how do you want to get more resilient technology, the funding mechanisms for how you do this is also changed. And what we're seeing a lot more of is organizations not looking at capital that they're going to allocate a specific budget for the year for my build activities, but also do I want to shift this? Do I actually want to make a capital investment? Do I want to shift the spend into an OPEX? Do I want to outsource these functionalities? Do I want to run as a managed service? So these are the different considerations that allow you not only resiliency and scalability, but allows you to keep up to date with the technologies. And then resilient society, which is, what is your role as a steward in this environment, for want of a better word, is apart from being able to just meet compliance standards, but from an environmental perspective, from a BE perspective, from an employee and a diversity perspective, are you actually embracing what is intended behind this? And are you making it work for you? So your ESG agenda, beyond compliance, what those measures are, what are you going to bring back? And what I would suggest, and we're starting to see as well, is that apart from measuring, whether you percentage compliant environmentally or otherwise to legislation, is actually being able to measure whether you've created new business value out of that. And that, I think, will fundamentally change the mindset with which you approach a resilient society. All right. The next couple of slides is really, and I think you can look at that as part of your. I see we're probably very quickly running out of time, as part of the deeper reading around this. But if I look at each of these elements, and we've talked through them, right? We talked about some of the strategies you can employ. It is not just something that your CPO is going to look at. It's we all at some level reporting to a CFO and a CEO, but this is a joint agenda. And if you as a supply chain professional do not have the seat at the table where the CEO, the CFO, and the CIO, and I think it's now a chief data officer as well, are having these conversations about how they want to take the organization forward, then you need to get there with haste, because the more joint to fight for your piece of the pie, if you are able to demonstrate value to the organization in your strategies, that's how you not only earn yourself a seat at the table, but also start to ensure that you're creating that resiliency end to end. So this is a really long list, and I've put it in here in between because we're obviously looking at strategy, growth, operations, and technology. And from an operations and technology perspective, this is a really long list of things that you can start to look at in your respond recover areas. I'll show a little later, specifically around the supply chain area, that the emergence of demand and supply planning, as well as control towers, and this whole interconnectedness of this digital supply network as opposed to a supply chain, and how that's evolved over time. The customer engagement being very critical. And I think what we need to see is that as much as we show these as streams, these really have to be coordinated and integrated efforts, starting with the customer need in mind first, and then understanding what the rest of your organization does to support that agenda. Okay, like I said, you can go through the detail, just some additional ideas and initiatives that you can consider in order to proactively address some of these challenges in the market. Okay, so let's bring it down back into a resilient supply chain, right? So what we're seeing is that supply chains were very much developed around cost optimization. I heard earlier in the conversation about this is savings, and you've got to negotiate, and that's basically the value add that you bring from a supply chain perspective. But it's actually so much more, right? So we that focus, that singular focus on savings and discounts that you want to get from your vendors really should be second to mind, because it really should be about value and not about actual cost. So while you have been optimizing on leanness, you actually need to be able to change this so that you'll have a lot more flexibility. That may cost you a little more in the short term, but we spoke about earlier is that paradox, right, between where you focus in the short term and how you build for the long term. So creating very specialized supply chains as well. While what we're seeing now is this move towards a more customer-centric supply chain. So flexing your supply chain so that it speaks to the type and nature of your customer, the type of product in which they're buying, the nature in which they're buying, so that you actually may have very different supply chains for different supplier groups, but how are you able to configure that without booming costs? So, I spoke earlier about the right ecosystem of partners. You've seen a lot of retailers starting to embrace very much smaller 4PL providers to enhance their last mile so that they can meet the same-day delivery requirements from a client perspective. So you don't have to do everything yourself. Understanding your ecosystem, very critical. How do you move from being reactive, building in predictability? So this predictability of being able to take your old data, understand where your clients are going to go to, what your network is going to look like, where your inventory is, how you're able to move your inventory. So now not only do you need to be able to do that within your organization, if you're embracing a strategy that gives you perspectives where you are pulling an ecosystem of partners, are you able to integrate your ecosystem partners' data into your own organization so that you can get truly predictive and really rich enhanced machine learning that can drive behavior? And I spoke about center focused, enterprise focused on you versus focused on the network of your suppliers and across, just your organization as well. So integrating marketing, supply chain, operations, finance, and connecting them into the decision-making process. Okay. So very quickly, the pillars of resilience really around visibility. It starts with visibility, and I spoke about that, is how are we integrating different data sources, whether it's internal data source, and we still find many organizations that do their sales planning completely independently of their ops planning and their supply chain planning and their financial planning, and how these all talk together to each other and gets automated and gives you a lot more efficiency. It starts with visibility and being able to integrate those systems. That will lead to flexibility so that you are able to move across different areas, make decisions a lot quicker. And collaboration, I believe, goes hand in hand with visibility, is that in order to create that visibility, you've got to have that collaboration going, understanding what we're driving through, common data sets, master data management really starting to come to the fore here. And then what do we do when it comes to control? So control is something that is an evolving concept, is taking the first three, taking that collaboration, the visibility. So now not only can I see where the problem is, I can also communicate with my supplier to get that. But how do we flex that control? So we're starting from very manual control, where I'm able to use all the information at my disposal, but I am manually making the decision for what changes in my network in order to optimize it and meet the customer demand, to what is now moving towards cognitive, which is how am I using machine learning to automate as much of that decision making as possible. Clients are kind of halfway in between, looking at where I can automate low value changes in decisions, but where I have a high value and a high impact is being able to have some human intervention before I actually execute on that decision making. All right. So again, I think there's going to be a good few strategies that you're going to be able to read through here about how you are going to be able to respond in the short term. We're fortunately, I think, a little bit beyond this right now. I'll give some examples of let me go into it quickly, where we've done this for, especially where clients are starting to diversify their supply network, and clients often come to us and we talk about, market intelligence, and it really starts to get back down to what previously was, what do I as Kavitha know about my network, about the suppliers that are on there, and it's built up from decades worth of experience and networking with these guys. And what technology is really starting to help you be able to do is move that dependence from that single point of contact or someone that's been there for 20 years and with life being as uncertain as it is right now may not be here tomorrow, to being able to say, if you tell me what you want to buy, who you're buying it from, we're using open source data and probably potentially some proprietary databases to be able to give you a view as to where your risk lies. So while you may have some concentration risk in the East or locally, what that is, but that is something that we use a network strategy or a discovery strategy and a mining strategy from different databases to be able to give you that view at a quick glance without having to have any human intervention, but also using trustworthy and open source data. And then building in the artificial intelligence, the AI, the machine learning that's able to actually give you the suggestions that you can then make them actionable. And then not only that, but when you actually create that action, and this comes back from what we're looking at from which is my next case study as to what we're doing with clients, is how am I taking that visibility that we've created for something like understanding the risks that your suppliers build into your network, understanding your end-to-end, what your distribution centers look like, your stock holdings, your inventory level, putting that into a control tower, and then being able to make these decisions. But the critical part about this for me is that not only are you able to make these decisions in an automated fashion, but you're actually able to quantify immediately what that value is. So if I am trying to meet demand of a stock item that is in an area that is has understocked inventory, and moving that from, say, I don't know, my Durban office to my Gauteng office, because that's where the demand is, I can see immediately what the value of my sale is, what the value of the cost that's associated with moving that particular piece of inventory, so I know the net impact. And previously, it was very hard to quantify the impact of certain decisions, but so it not only gives you the ability to do this much quicker, but being able to see that a lot more visibly. Okay, I'm sure I'm out of time, so I'm going to go very quickly through these next few concepts, which is really about moving the curve. And I think we often hear what gets measured gets done. And here I want to build up this, it's not a new concept by any means. I think a lot of this has existed in ops research for a very long time, but it's really come to the fore, which is how am I measuring resilience and agility in my organization, right? And I'm going to go through this and maybe stop here. Just looking at saying, am I modifying my KPIs? So, for example, if we spoke earlier about our social, and our risk factors. If I'm looking at my tier one suppliers, do I have a view as to what that looks like operationally? Hard measures such as the percentage of raw materials that have more than one supplier. And you can take that forward into another measure from a resiliency perspective, percentage of raw materials that's sourced ethically and sustainably with traceability. What a percentage of my routes are not only more efficient from a operations perspective, but also from a carbon footprint perspective, supply lead time. So this will give you a lot more from your resiliency perspective. And then similarly, finding different measures that measure your agility. And this isn't part of our normal day-to-day. We aren't measuring these things. We're measuring turnaround times for your procurement instances. We're measuring delivery. We're measuring OTIF. And this fundamentally changes the granularity for what you measure, but also is going to make you see whether or not you have actually equipped yourself and from a resiliency perspective, and have you made improvements over time. So I'm going to stop there for questions. It was a mouthful and quite a lot. And maybe just one last thought and really 2 seconds on this is that it's really about designing from the heart. This is not, I spoke a lot about tactical measures, technology measures that you could employ, but this is people on the journey with you, giving people permission to fail, embracing the long view, and understanding mostly what your mission is before you start.
Thank you. That was, you saying it was a mouthful, but it was a very insightful research, Kavitha. We've got some questions here before we go on. I have one as well. It was interesting to see some of the outcomes that are coming out in terms of the research, critical thinking, creativity, empathy. I was very intrigued that those are now coming out as one of the requirements in building that resilience in supply chain management. That was very interesting for me. I then had a question that in most cases there's a whole compliance issue in the supply chain space that is it can sometimes hinder creativity. It can sometimes hinder those collaborative efforts, and also the empathy and all these nice things that we actually do need in organizations in order to be effective, but not just be effective, to be resilient. How do we balance, in your view? It's not I don't think it's an easy answer, but just for you to share in having done the research, how do you balance managing the compliance and risk in the supply chain management, but also foster and stimulate this creativity, this curiosity, being empathetic, etc.?
Sure. So I think, look, a couple of things for me. One is that I've often seen it where I've been on multiple sides of the fence, right? So I've been in supply chain, I've been in the consulting environment, and I've been in operations. So you spoke earlier about how, you often seen as this person you want to put in the rules and be the police person, and that's necessary, right? Because you're actually there to make sure good governance is in place. But what you start is that when you start with a compliance conversation, you stop being seen as a business partner to operations. So the first thing I would do is say, where can I move the oversight and the compliance so that it's not associated with me, Phumzile, or with me, Kavitha, that you are the policeman or the watchdog in this whole thing. Because when I don't know about you, but when I go to get stopped by a cop on the road, even if I'm not speeding, I'm not doing anything, I immediately feel guilty, and I'm almost, already on my guard. So if you're going to engage with someone in that method, then you're never going to win the battle. So that's what, and there are different techniques for that. So what I would say is that you need to start embracing the digital techniques that allow you to understand, to be able to spot where the lapses in governance are, where the potential fraudulent issues are. So we know how, our business counterparts try and navigate the system so that they stay under delegation of authority levels, or they do all sorts of weird things in the process. So if we can move a lot of that outside of that process, but also being able to catch that so that you are almost depersonalizing that compliance conversation from you as a person. So let's move that there so that they can see it. It's very open. It's there, forcing people on contract spend. So I think a lot of those that technology is going to take out your compliance role and leave it to a watchdog that actually is on 24/7 and can actually monitor your operations 24/7. And then the other one is saying, and this is a little bit harder to do because often when we talk to CPOs, one of the things that they struggle with most is how they get a seat at the table. So how are you included in that strategic conversation? And this ties back to, how do I get to that creative thinking and that empathy? In order for you to get into that space where you are a solutions provider and an innovation provider, you have to be tied to the strategic agenda to be taken seriously. And so I would say, divorce yourself from your compliance role and find more innovative ways to be able to execute them, but get yourself a seat at the table. And often that conduit is through your CFO. You actually need to work that. So you need to, if your organizations are not ones that foster cross-functional teams in terms of dealing with problem solving, get yourself invited to them, find the right sponsor, include yourself in those conversations. So if you're the CPO, you should have a seat at the table already. It's been given to you. But if you can't find that, do it through your CFO, engage in that. But I'd also say start to build, and this is my third one, is if you aren't able to do that, for example, you can't embrace the technology, you're not quite certain you have the political power in your organization to navigate yourself into a boardroom or an exco conversation, start with your own organization. So when you are doing your procurement planning for the year and you are dealing with business operations and you are solving your own problems within your supply chain organization, create the space for your creative thinking, your empathy within your own organization, and then slowly grow that out. Include, and we spoke earlier about stakeholder management and how you start a lot more collaboration. If you've got a friendly face in business, and there's always one, right, where you have a better relationship where you have, and usually it's not the engineering guys, it's someone from, I don't know, some other department, bring them into your fold, create your successes and make those successes visible so that you are able to actually showcase the value of your creative thinking while you are taking it.
That's great insight. And I'm trying, as I'm listening to you, I'm trying to put it in a practical situation as a CPO, to say, try and divorce yourself from being seen as a compliance or a police officer. Then that will mean there's a safety, a trust space that needs to be there, because the fact of the matter, whether we want to accept it or not, when things go wrong, CPO is the first person to be called in to answer. And the buyer is the first person to be called to answer. As a result, then compliance is used as a fallback, but then compliance starts to create other issues for the very CPO who wants to be part of the business, who wants to be part of the strategic conversations, etc., etc. So it really is a catch-22. But I hear you when you say there must be you need to create some systems, and technology can be used quite a bit to create that visibility, that trust, that transparency, etc., to say this is how things are going, this is where, the roles and responsibilities are lying, and then you can then start moving out of that and start having other strategic conversations as a value add in the business.
So, and if one comment on that is, if technology is not necessarily a short-term option for you, an operating model configuration is, right? So how are you able to keep compliance ring-fenced to a few people that will look at compliance, but create enough in your operating model so that you have almost account executive type of mentality that creates the trust relationship with your business end user, and those two roles shouldn't be in the same person.
Got you. Let's see. Spongile is asking, Kavitha, how do we fare as SA looking at the global resilience report?
Yeah, so I think there's always two sides, and I think we, with our Gini coefficient, we have these extremes, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say even our leading organizations, I must say, are not as resilient. I think they, just because of the nature of the pandemic and where it hit us the hardest, being in the consumer sector, I think our consumer sector is a lot more resilient. So you will see our retailers, how quickly they bounce back from a supply perspective. They have a lot of connectivity. They have a lot more flexibility. So a lot of those concepts, the ecosystem of partners, they really start to embrace. So there is that real extreme, and you see guys like a Woolies, that sort of thing that are starting to embrace that journey a lot stronger. And then you go into probably more industrialized, even if we're looking at the larger corporates, the mining sector, where the resilience is kind of there, but I think because of the speed of their operations not quite being an FMCG, they're a lot more tolerant of some of the failures. Also, I think often the case, except for when obviously they couldn't get their product out, the cost of that risk was worth the effort of them bearing it, because they often were, depending on the commodity, they often were cash rich, and they could avoid that. But I think what we're seeing already is how clients are now starting to understand that they can't be repeating the mistake. If you are, if you reacted to the riots as badly as you did to when the pandemic hit, then you've actually not done anything. So from a maturity perspective, I think it's across the spectrum. Strangely enough, at the lower end, where we have some startup businesses, because they were able to leapfrog a lot from a technology perspective, they actually, you find pockets of excellence from a resiliency perspective, but by far and large, and this is probably a truth across the board, is that smaller businesses are not as resilient just because they don't have the money to throw at the problem. They can't build in the redundancy and some of the resilience mitigation methods that we would have, that we would like to see.
In your own practical words, how can supply chain add or contribute to the revenue resilience you've pointed out in the beginning? Because it's not just about operations.
Right. Okay. So, and I think there's a couple of things. Again, I use consumer and consumer goods as a good example. Now, it's another survey altogether because we do a lot of these surveys, but there was one that was done very specifically from a local perspective. And it was done from a customer angle. And one of the core themes that came out of there was that the cost of delivery, as well as the cost of returns and the reverse logistics, or time to get my money back if I've returned an item, is a key issue and a key driver for businesses. For customers, and it's a critical element. So that is neatly a supply chain topic, right?
Yeah.
So not only, so if I am able to meet my customer demand from wherever it comes from, in order to, because there's a lot of lost opportunity for not having the right inventory level, the right stock. So that revenue conversation definitely gets lifted by being able to optimize your supply chain operations and make sure your OTIF is always in check. And then that whole concept of the reverse logistics. Now, for example, and the one that I use there is an online shoe company, right, that allows you to buy a pair of shoes in 6 colors. I'd probably keep all 6 colors if they sent it to me, but it really improves the value of the sale. So you're going to conclude it. The person's actually able to get that done. Will probably buy more than a single pair, but what's critical as part of that is not only do I provide them the facility to try on 6 pairs, but I must be able to get it back and give them a refund as quickly. Again, a supply chain problem. So I think there's very many opportunities like that because you are actually now, the supply chain team is now the replacement for the bricks and mortar storefront in the real world. You become that salesperson. That's how you're able to drive sales longer. So if I've got excess stock, how do I do my promotional planning, for example, at a localized level based on what my inventory holding is? That certainly for perishable goods, that's going to become so. Within the optimization of the function itself, you can use that as opportunities for revenue generation.
Okay, gotcha. There's a statement or a question from Pumla. Should youth not also feature in the societal contribution? Youth today will be making a part of the business customer base in the future. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so and I potentially didn't touch enough on that because there was a lot to cover this morning. So I think absolutely. I think going back to it's critical, not just from a female. I think all the underrepresented groups in terms of success and economic success, if you will, are coming to the fore. We are seeing a lot more organizations, and it started off really as compliance, right? So you'd have the various industry charters that forced spend or development from an ESG perspective, whether it's from youth or disabled groups. It really did start off as compliance and people wanting to make sure they maximize their scorecard. What we are seeing now, and this is happening not just at organizational level, but at industry level, is that the focus is actually about how are we able to make a difference. So it's not just I'm going to give you a category of spend that is unimportant and not competitive. So I'm not going to give you stationery and whatever. Absolutely, right? So then I actually want to build capability. So where we've worked with, say, for example, the mining industry to be able to create not just only opportunities for women in business, but youth in business, creating new manufacturing capabilities that obviously kind of contributes towards job growth and economic prosperity for all. The localization initiatives, absolutely core. Or happening right now. Some industries moving a lot quicker than others.
Okay. So that sounds like good news, because we have been seeing reversal, because the reversal in the gains we've made. And I think because we were doing it just to tick the box, and that is not sustainable. You need to do it because you want to create sustainability for the future, for the underrepresented spaces in our economy.
Look, absolutely. And I think it's a twofold thing. One is that was a tick box exercise, but I think also that organizations will try to do it by themselves. So where you have a singular organization that, has, I don't know, R1 million to spend on something versus trying to do it at industry level and pooling 10 million rand. So I offer, and a large percentage, let's be fair, a large percentage of that cost that you are putting towards enterprise development actually gets eaten up by administrative and PMO costs and all of that. And if you are able to pool that at an industry level, your bang for buck becomes that much greater, but you also not only ensuring the sustainability of that business for your business, but also the fact that they will be able to get revenue from other players in the environment the need dry up on your side as well.
And the entire ecosystem is then impacted. Okay.
100%.
Roy Harrington is saying, hi, Kavitha. Resilient supply chains are a way forward, but are SA companies ready from moving from network focused to enterprise focused?
So I think it's enterprise to network focus. So I think, again, I'll go back to my previous answer. It really is a case of, it depends on who the organization is and where they actually are feeling the pain, right? The forerunners right now are in mining, and mining across the board is starting to become something that integrates well with their suppliers. I think automotive is starting to follow a similar view, and consumers certainly, just because the pressures really on their margins are tight, they do struggle with and the benefits, I think, for a network-based approach is so much, it's amplified so much in the consumer sector, just because of the touch points of data that you can get and the how widespread the customers are themselves. So they are ready for it. I think what you'd be surprised by, especially when we work with a lot of startup technology companies that we take through the ranks, is what's actually available out there, how quick it is to get in, almost start with a minimum viable product, being able to show. So for example, I showed the control tower earlier, is we were able to stand that up in a 6 to 12 week period, depending on what they wanted to see and what that level of integration is. Because it's cloud based, we are able to stand that up at low cost without you having to necessarily procure full licenses. We use it for that POV period only. But also, when I want to add on use cases, or I want to add on data points, I scale a lot more quickly. So it's about how you do it. Different organizations are embracing it differently.
So what has really been coming through as a common thread, even from yesterday, and it's coming through again in your presentation, is that really supply chain management can start adding value. They need to be moving from being reactive, and they need to understand the market. They need to understand the ecosystem that they are operating in, and then they can start bringing that value into their organizations, whether we want to accept that as or not. But it's difficult, yes, understandably, to start steering an organization that is not used to operating that way. So the next question from Pumla, it follows from there. So she's saying, how do we then encourage our service procurement to use more network analysis software, and so that they can improve on their strategic sourcing capabilities?
I just want you to clarify the first one. So we're talking about organizations ourselves, or the extended organizations with our suppliers, that sort of thing. But
I think either way, to the organization itself, but then you can see how you can then expand that to the entire ecosystem, because it eventually has to link back to the ecosystem.
So for me, the most important word is value, right? So it is almost like, and we used to thinking in a very traditional, that monolithic environment where we approach the world in a very waterfall kind of way. So if you are able to provide value and point value, so where my investment versus my return is very obvious, and it's not just the value, but time to value. So am I going to be able to do this in a quick and a short time frame? So I think anything beyond a 3-month horizon is too long. So if you are, I would say you take your whatever you want to do, you demonstrate the capability, and you'll find that a lot of the software vendors, consulting companies are very happy to engage in those short-term initiatives that create that value, show that value, even willing to invest their time and efforts into it. But you need to choose your use cases really well, right? First, it's got to be a burning platform in your company, but also it's got to have either an efficiency or a financial impact or a value, or both if it's a winner. So being able to choose a smaller use case starts is, I think we have another one of those three-step process, which is think big, start small, and scale fast. So you've got to, although you've got to have the end picture in mind, you've got to start with something really small, minimum viable product. Get interest from showing value around it. We also keep the costs as low as possible so that an organization has the appetite to try it. It's an approach we take to market very often.
Yeah, and I think then it touches back to the analytical capability that I think it's lacking in most of supply chain management spaces. We are unable to communicate analytically to the business on the value or the lack thereof. Therefore, we are just being measured by the stock didn't arrive in time, but we can't measure the entire value system to then communicate analytically to say, this is where it's going wrong, this is where we can improve, etc., etc. Especially specifically for the services business, it's a bit more trickier. So I hear what you're saying. It needs our analytical capability. Supply chain needs to start communicating these things to the business and start demonstrating the value add through that. Okay, Kavitha, I don't know if you're still there or is it me who was frozen? Hello? Are you back?
On my network.
Okay, could you hear me though?
I lost you. I probably, if you wouldn't mind repeating your last one.
Okay, so I don't know where, but I was just basically reframing to say this, then to me, it talks back to the analytical capability that supply chain needs to have in order for them to communicate to the business that they are servicing, you know, the entire value chain. Because I think one of the issues we have in challenges is supply chain. We are unable to communicate analytically to the strategies or at the strategic level on what is actually happening. Where are you having issues? Where can you improve? Where can you add value? How do you then align your activities to our strategic goals? And it's especially more challenging for the service-based than product-based organizations.
Look, and I think that goes back to whether you have the skills in the organization, and let's be brutally honest, there are going to be people in the organization that can cross that divide, absorb those analytical skills, some of those the more business strategic skills, and you should equip them with them. But you should also think about when in your operating model whether you've got room for that conversation, right? And it needs to be focused, it needs to be deliberate, because the trouble with giving someone two roles like that, a strategic role and an operational role, is that the operational role will always trump it on a day-to-day basis. So you've got to give that head space, you've got to have that team. If you need, young data scientists are young, eager, they can equip with some of the analytical capability, but you need an experienced set of hands that knows how to position it and package it so that it is presentable and has the right value statement back to your end users.
Agreed. Tebogo is asking, does Deloitte have a system of evaluating bids online, seeing that we are moving into the digital space?
Yeah, look, there's a lot that's happening in the digital procurement space, both from sourcing all the way into the whole S2P landscape. We often get, so you're talking about automating of the process, and there are elements that you can automate very, very easily. How you issue the documents, the evaluation criteria, which suppliers. So there's, all the way into the contract and enforcing contract on spend. So I think the whole S2P landscape is there. You've got systems like Coupa, Ariba, Zycus, all of these things that are leading edge that we don't create our own. We partner with these various OEMs and implement at our clients with a lot of benefit. We've seen business cases being realized within 6 to 7 months. So your entire project paid back with 6 to 7 months worth of savings already in the first year, or some reaching double that by a year. So I think there's a very definite case for that. The one thing, though, I'd caution against is that, and it depends on how complex your environment is, that some straightforward procurement evaluation processes you can automate with a relative degree of ease. The problem is if you want to remove the human element from more complex bids, that's not as easy to do, right? So I think putting in a properly auditable process and structure around how you deal with complex bids is as important as throwing technology around it. So it's a governance and a process issue tied with that. But certainly, I mean, there's like I said, there's a large number of service providers that provide that type of automation.
Okay. Last question from Roy Harrington. Although indexed approach for resilient adds value and simulation-based approaches are powerful, they are, however, complicated. Do your clients struggle with the resilience index calculation?
Yeah, so good point. And I think it really depends on the maturity. So we've got a center of excellence in Belgium that runs a fair amount of the more complicated resilience KPIs. I think there's a maturity level there that's different from a client perspective. What we do is we start off with some things that are very, very simple, just understanding and almost framing it in what you want to achieve. So what is your ultimate goal? So redefining those KPIs. And back to, I think, Roy's point is that a lot of those KPIs, certainly the more involved agility and the resilience KPIs, are really dependent on you having a fair amount of not only accurate data, but granular data so that you can drive it. So, and that's how the simulations are built in. So two things. I think we start off very simply and make sure that the data we have available drives what we are measuring in the short term. But what I found is that visibility creates a whole range of opportunities. So just even if you are making simple data visible, it really reconfigures your thinking and your understanding of the problem you're dealing with a different solution set. So once we've got clients then on this particular system, we start off, like I said, with a minimum viable product, probably a low maturity from a KPI and a data perspective, building the processes up. So we're starting to collect more enhanced data, more granular data, and then evolving that KPI over time so that you are able to do those more different simulations. Now, the one caveat being is that for some of them, we are able to use historical transactional data, provided it has a reasonable level of cleansing around it, but nothing onerous. And obviously you run your scenarios and your machine learning on it, and it learns from that. The pandemic has been an anomaly, right? And what it has done is you often do almost your seasonal type of forecasting, that sort of thing. Because the pandemic has been an anomaly, what we've really seen clients struggle with is that ability to forecast given the changes in behavior patterns from our clients. And that needs a little more intensive work because you've actually got to understand what's driving it. Like in our case, it might be the economy, the job losses, driving different buying patterns for luxury goods versus essentials, and even in the essentials, high price versus low price categories. So the data is a little bit dirty right now, but I think as you include more data into it and run your processes, you will build that up over time. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Kavitha. That was a very insightful presentation. I see you have shared the link to the resource. It seems like you've also shared the link to additional resources as well, so the guys can pick that up from the audience on the box. Thank you very much. I think there's a lot more reading to be done. There's a lot more value. And we keep on going back to it, and it has come through from yesterday that supply chain management is a valuable function in our economy, in our organizations. It's very vital. we therefore need to start demonstrating our values. How do we add the value into the bottom line? How do we add value into our top line in organizations? We cannot just be compliance driven. However, compliance is important. Governance structures needs to be put in place. We need to be able to balance that and demonstrate how do we add value. And I think many interventions has come about, practical interventions that we can take out and apply as of this afternoon and tomorrow as supply chain experts in our field.